Campside Media.
Hey Campside listeners, welcome back to Inside the Tent, our show where we go behind the microphone of our favorite podcasts and talk to the people who brought them to life. My name is Garrett Tiedemann, and I'm a sound designer at Campside Media. I've been with Campside for a few years now and been behind some of our most successful shows like Suspect, Wild Boys, Dr. Dante, and Noble. Today we're doing something a little different. I'm talking to Kevin Seaman about his sound design work on the show Run Fool. The show is currently in its second season, and as we discussed, is an incredibly thoughtful and well-conceived horror show that week to week takes you on a journey into the darkest possibilities of storytelling, all the while adhering to a set of design rules that distinguish it from anything else out there right now. As part of our conversation, we also get into a lot of Kevin's influences like David Lynch, Hammer Horror, Bernard Herrmann, and the theme to Halloween. And while we do not play samples in the interview, I would encourage you to seek out anything that is new or unfamiliar to your ears, as it will only broaden your appreciation for what Kevin and the team is accomplishing with this show. Run Fool has also just launched a brand new subscription feed that gives you ad-free episodes, chats with Rodney Barnes himself, as well as an extra epilogue at the end of upcoming weekly episodes. So if you find yourself at the end of a story, desperately wanting to know what happens next, then head over to joinrunfool.com. That's joinrunfool.com. And that's not all. If you want even more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes anecdotes from our other Campside shows, make sure to go to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com. Now, let's get to the interview. So, Run Fool's in its second season, which Congratulations on that. That's
Thank you.
Always an achievement to get renewed, especially these days.
No kidding.
I kind of thought I'd just start with maybe you taking us back to the beginning and talk about the process of determining the show's overall sound and what influenced your thoughts on that.
It started actually when I first started talking to Rodney, and we clicked immediately on influence. He's a little older than I am. I'm 48. So we grew up basically, though, in the same genre wheelhouse of Hammer horror films, Universal horror films, and Kolchak the Night Stalker. And there's like these weird little episodic mini shows like Ray Bradbury Theater, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no,
so
totally.
we clicked on that immediately. And so we had an immediate shorthand from the get-go. And even when we started, it was a trial and error situation of, well, Rodney could record it in his house, and there was a whole thing, and that did not work out so well. But while Abakar and I would supervise the recording sessions and direct him, essentially, especially the epilogues, we modeled it after. You ever remember the old Incredible Hulk show with Bill Bixby?
Yeah.
The sad Hulk theme at the end?
Yeah.
So all the epilogues, when Rodney reads them, he taps into that. And that's been kind of our thing, to make it as melancholy and just like, I want to cry, I think. But he sells it every time. So that's kind of where it started. And then when I would get the sessions and start mixing, because I tend to just play off Rodney's voice. Sometimes I start building early on, depending on how complicated it is, especially if there's like a monster or we need voice actors to do monsters or whatever, like we did for the whole Hog episode. Mm-hmm. I primarily do a majority of the design work, just like jazz. I react to him. And then we have like our stock music that I dip into, but I've been trying to change it up a little bit.
I noticed in the last few episodes, I noticed a change of dimension.
Yeah, there's just been some of the stories have been a little darker and psychological. Bottle Tree, for example, is very psychological. It's basically about alcoholism. So it's like grappling with that and just playing off Rodney. I mean, that's been how I've been doing it since day one. I think I was a little too carried away in the first 3 episodes we did, like in the first season. They're a little too jam-packed. Okay. And I started simplifying a lot more because I think Rodney got better as a narrator.
So you didn't have to do as much to lift?
Yeah, you didn't have to do as much because he kind of got it. And I think it started around Phantom Hitchhiker.
Okay.
And then worked its way through over time.
Nice.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that sticks out to me is that there's a really consistent tonal palette episode to episode while still being distinct episode to episode. How do you do that? Like, how hard is that for you to accomplish? And like, how do you keep each episode feeling fresh while still very cognizant of like, it still needs to feel like this show?
Sure. I think it's just sort of a natural intuition.
Okay.
It just happens. I'll follow the David Lynch way of doing things, of just, you know your voice, and it's just trying to sculpt it to fit the show in some way.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed is, a lot of fiction podcasts, especially horror ones, like the design will be way more in your face and like the Foley will be really loud and stuff, but this isn't. It's a little more back. Is that just part of how you see it? Keeping Rodney up front and center?
Yeah. My idea is like he's reading a bedtime story. So you don't want to be jostled out of bed by like, oh my God, there's this awful Brahms sound at the very end.
Right.
So it's more just finding a balance. I think it also depends on the story. With Whole Hog, it's a little more in your face because we were modeling it after Texas Chainsaw. So like the sound design in Texas Chainsaw is so specific.
I really liked Whole Hog, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Thank you.
There was just something when I listened to that this week, both in that I was prepping to talk to you, but just in general, it felt like it encapsulated so much of what makes the show great because it's got so many voices and there's a lot of meta referencing going on to film and things like that, but it never falls too far into just being
parody.
Reference.
Right.
Yeah. It has an interesting tie to the one just before it because they both have piano runs that reference Halloween very specifically.
Totally.
Which I was like, as I'm listening, I'm like, is that just because Halloween is so obvious, or is that something he's always doing and I'm not recognizing it?
I think it's in the DNA of my brain at this point because I saw that movie when I was 5. I mean, the Carpenter scores, all the Carpenter scores are so like locked into my head. I don't think I could ever shake them off. It was a lot of fun to do because I like the multi-voice thing, and we have 2 voice actors that we work with, Terry Casper and Colette Anderson, who do a great job. And Terry, he's been on a bunch of episodes, and he's just so good. Yeah. He has a range that is just fabulous. I think he played one of the, was like a scientist or something in last season. I can't remember, Hotel Montauk maybe. But he did this sort of Waitsy growl, which was just terrific.
As you've been going through this and you've got your aesthetic and your palette you developed, have you found there to be specific types of music or instrumentation that works best more often than not, or like types of sounds that seem to always fit?
I find the prologues and the epilogues being like the touchstones. Last year we did this thing where I found a beautiful little, really sad cello piece that I would play at the end of the epilogues. And that was sort of a touchstone. I kind of moved away from it to more piano-y type stuff and more drone-like stuff towards the end. But the prologue and epilogue sort of sets the tone. And as we go through the show, it kind of stays in that balance throughout. But that sort of is the like starting point for me. Because as I said, like when I start an episode, I just play off Rodney's voice and how he's reading the story. And it's just reacting to that.
That makes a lot of sense. His voice is so much character and is so musical on its own.
It's like jazz. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Is there anything you've found that doesn't work?
Cliches, old horror tropes don't work. For this particular show, especially since he's narrating it and it's sort of set, as I said earlier, like he's telling a 10-year-old girl a bedtime story, to overuse the traditional horror tropes to sell a thing seem not to work. And I was just finishing up a mix on one show we did called The Border, which drops next week, I think. And there's like a lot of screaming in it. And it's just trying to find the balance between Rodney telling the story and not being too distracted by like, man screaming now, or his gruesome body stood up. And then how much do you want to sell that? I like to leave as much to the imagination as possible and not allow too much in regards to like over showing or over listening, so to speak.
You did a really good job of that with Whole Hog, because that would have been really easy to overplay your hand on.
Totally.
And I think it's one of the episodes I found to be most sort of referential to cinema, as well as to the funny cliches of cinema going audiences with all the little, no, you don't go in there. Why are you going in there?
Yeah. That's what, and then we haven't really, I think we did a couple of those last year. And I was like, well, the show's called Run Fool. And then Rodney does his like little promos on Instagram. And he's like, well, I don't know if she should go in that. No, don't go in the woods. Right. Don't do it. Don't do it. He has one up right now about Blair Witch Project going, I don't know why you would go into the middle of the woods on a dark night with just a bunch of cameras. So, and he sells that well, and it's funny as hell. He was watching a TikTok video a couple weeks ago, and he was just like reviewing it as he watched it, saying, yeah, you don't go up the steps. What are you doing?
So I heard one of the things you all are doing is episodes are going to get longer. Is that exciting?
I think it's great. They're doing like the subscription model thing where they're going to do these epilogues or creature origin stories. I pitched an idea where we just do a Rodney Nightmare Diary. It's like a one act, almost like a Kafka story, which would be kind of fun to do.
Why do you think you work well with Rodney?
I think we just have a certain viewpoint and the same sort of grammar, film grammar and influence. I'm not as into comic books as he is, but I can easily just understand where he's coming from. And that was made very apparent in the early sessions. I don't direct as many or listen in as many anymore, but he's got it down to such a science. You're just naturally attracted to the people that kind of have a similar mindset, I guess, or just aesthetic.
It makes things a lot easier.
Oh, sure. So much. There's a reason Hitchcock worked with Jimmy Stewart for so long, you know?
I was just watching a thing that highlighted how unique Bernard Herrmann's work was.
Oh, absolutely.
And how it worked specifically very well for Hitchcock. You know, his work could work for a lot of other people, but there was just something so specific that made it work for Hitchcock's films.
It's amazing. I actually heard a funny story that Brian De Palma's told when Herrmann scored Sisters. Mm-hmm. And it was that he temped the whole film with tracks from either Psycho or Vertigo. And the moment Herrmann listened to the temp tracks, he said, no, take it all off. Just give me the movie. I'll take care of it.
Oh, that's great. Do you ever write music for this show?
I've created music. I wouldn't say write. I take advantage of a lot of the stems and just sort of build something out of that. I haven't specifically written anything per se that I could put my finger on. I could definitely say that I created drones or environments.
Are you okay going into a little bit of what that means for someone who maybe doesn't know what that means?
Oh, sure.
Say you take something from, say, Blue Dot, but then what does it mean to, instead of just taking that Blue Dot's piece of music and throwing it in, to say, I'm going to take the stems and I'm going to create something with it?
I try to achieve sort of an emotional reaction to it, and you can manipulate it to make it work. I really like the cello here, and then I want to add the weird percussive bells to make it just kind of sing.
So then are you also taking pieces from different points in the song and combining them? Mm-hmm. Do you slow stuff down?
Oh, yeah. I've done that, and I've sped them up, and I've put like echo effects on them and stuff just to make them ring a little more. Mm-hmm. I think in one of the tracks I used for this last episode, I just put it in a reverb chamber and just sort of let it purr underneath a scene. So like all the detail was sucked out of it. There's like a fog. Like, what does fog sound like? You can't really say, but you can kind of make people react in a way that I feel like I'm getting swimmy in my head and what's going on right now.
Right. It's interesting because like for people who listen to a lot of podcasts, they'll sometimes hear a lot of the same music. And if you're just using the same thing over and over, you can inevitably have audiences be like, where did I hear this before? And then they're not listening to your show.
Right. When we were doing Radical last year, Johnny and I specifically chose, I don't know if you're familiar with the film, The Conversation.
Yeah.
So like the very stripped down, almost drone-like approach as Mosey talked, or when we were going through the show, and we got nominated for a sound design thing. I was like, oh, really? Weird. It's crazy. But I remember one of the reviews was, sometimes you get kind of lost in the show because it's kind of hypnotic and you just kind of lull to it.
Yeah. I think it's easy to be like, oh, it should just all be original, or, shouldn't use libraries, even though they're a great resource. But you can take libraries and you can transform them to the point that they are not the same thing. And so you are composing in a way, but you're also sort of curating and sampling to find something new that otherwise didn't exist.
Right. And I attribute that to my love for making mixtapes back in high school.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's exactly when I did Dr. Dante. I was like, this is a mixtape.
Yeah.
And these weird cutoffs and ambient sounds and things just coming in and out because you couldn't get the timing right.
Standing patiently by the pause button on the tape recorder.
Yeah. You get like 5 seconds in because you didn't realize the radio was going to play the song. And
it's the best. Or if you were taping over a tape, so it was pretty baked in at that point. So there was like that weird sort of hiss that came out of it. I mean, beauty of coming of age in the digital era, I started cutting tape in college, and then I learned Pro Tools in college. So it was linear editing to actual nonlinear editing in a span of 2 years. So that understanding and the choices you make, like I have to physically cut this. Is this the right choice? Versus just like, well, I could plop this in here and see how it plays. I think I credit that a lot to how I approach my workflow now.
I had the same with film.
Yeah.
Because like I started as a filmmaker before I got into podcasting.
Yeah, I went to film school too. So yeah, I totally feel you on that. Learning to cut on those A/B editing suites, like the video, that's a whole thing. It's a physical act that you had to do. I used to be a big proponent when I had the time of just making my own sound effects. But when, deadlines and pressure, you have to just dig and find the right one. But inevitably, I always go back to, I need the sound of this. I'll just make it real quick. It'll take me 15 seconds instead of spending 20 minutes looking for it. That's just sort of been my philosophy for a long time.
Looking forward, what are you excited about for like season 2 and what you're doing now versus a year ago?
Well, we have a budget now for voice actors, so I'm going to take advantage of that. It all comes down to the story, of course, and whether it fits or not. But I'm excited to have multi-voice radio type Wellesian things to come out of it, like the Mercury Theater stuff. That's one thing I'm excited about. I'm also excited about the story. I mean, the stories are just so good. When Abakar sends me the first script and I start building and reading over it, and it's always fun to see, what are we dealing with here? And there's now a certain point where, not to say that we're a fine-tuned machine, but I think the writers have finally locked in on Rodney's voice. And that goes with all the writers. But Kate being, front and center. I'm just excited to see what stories are going to come up next. We're working on a 2-parter. It'll be about these killer bees that would have been mutated from some nuclear power plant. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to make those bees sound.
I mean, that's exciting.
I know. I'm just trying to figure out how the swarm, would the swarm be a little bit different, I was actually just watching some old In Search of episodes with Leonard Nimoy, and they had an episode In Search of Killer Bees. There's the epilogue with Nimoy saying, and this is what I grew up on, so like, no wonder I have existential dread. We don't know if the bees are coming, but they're coming. We don't know if we can stop them, but they're still coming. Yeah, so I'll just go to bed thinking about that tonight. The bees are coming.
I want to pick up on something you said. So you start building before they've recorded.
Once I read the script, especially if there's a creature involved, I got to figure that out. I don't start scoring, though, till I get to Rodney.
So it's more focused on what sound effects you're going to need?
Yeah, just sort of playing around with that. There's a really cool plugin I found called Dehumanizer, which is fun.
Oh.
It takes a sample of, say, an animal, and then you plug in, say, dialogue or like whatever noise you want to make it, and then you can adjust the pitch and the size of it.
Has this show pushed you?
In a way, yes. But in a way, it's like, I don't want to be ridiculous, but it is kind of like make a very complex French meal. You're not thinking about how it's hard. You're just enjoying the process of it.
Do you feel like it's kind of a culmination of things you've worked toward?
Yes, absolutely. Without question. And also like things I love. Since David died and all the political nonsense that's happening right now, I've been trying to refocus my outlook in more positive light. He's definitely inspired that. So it's just focus on the art and not necessarily, I tend to get lost in the show, and it just shuts the world off, and it's absolutely lovely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
My mom died while I was finishing Dante.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I remember like everyone was like, well, do you want us to you can send it to another engineer? And I was like, well, one, I wouldn't want to get these out of context.
No.
Because my God. But two, I was like, I need to finish this.
Yeah.
I was like, then I'll go on break, but I need to finish this.
Yeah.
And, creative work has an amazing power to help when you let it.
Yeah, I tend to be sort of a hermit when I start working, so I tend to lock myself up. I can't stand interruption. I put my phone away. I can't deal with anything but just being in what I'm working on. Because disruption while you're working, especially what we do, you are trying to create a consistent tone.
Listening episode to episode is a real joy because you do feel like each one is distinct, but it's not so distinct that it's like you're listening to a different show. I
kind of compare it to like, I live in Philadelphia, so there's the Philadelphia sound for the Philadelphia Orchestra, which is this big, lush, warm kind of thing. The New York Philharmonic is a little more tinny, and the Cleveland Orchestra was always intimate. So I try to view it in that sense that, it's the Philadelphia sound. Let's call it that. It is warm. And I think that also makes it accessible because it feels like everything you've talked about, but it also feels a little bit like a warm blanket. And that's kind of the point of the show in a weird way. It makes you listen to things that you may not otherwise want to listen to
in just a little more comfortable situation.
There's a famous Tom Waits line, I like beautiful melodies telling me terrible things.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think it also brings back why horror can be so wonderful.
Yeah, and evocative.
So to wrap things up, for anyone who might be new to the show or wanting to listen, where should they start? Do you have some favorite episodes? And if they are your favorites, like why?
I have 3 of my absolute favorites. Phantom Hitchhiker, I think, is great because I think that's when the show finally got going. And I just love Hitchhiker stories. And
fair enough.
That was the first time we had another voice in the show. Black Aggie, I think, is paramount. It's my favorite episode that we've done because the story is so, so good. And Rodney sells it with his narration. And I really love The Dark Watchers a lot. I was listening to a lot of Schubert when I was working in that time period. So I based the whole soundscape, including the design, on the Winterreise by Schubert. So I have a fondness for Dark Watchers because of that.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I love Schubert, especially this time of year.
Have you had that experience with any other episodes? With like a different artist or anything?
Production duo, Mitchell Froom and Chad Blake. They did Latin Playboys, which is a band that was comprised of basically them and the 2 leaders of Los Lobos. And they did these 2 really beautiful, fractured pop records. And there's a few episodes that I kind of developed the sound around, trying to figure which one it was. I think it was The Pale Eye, maybe? The part 1 and 2 of The Pale Eye. You should check and listen to the Latin Playboys. They only did 2 records, but they're just so textural. And I played off that same thing because growing up in the mid-90s, late 90s, if you were into like indie music, Elvis Costello or whatever, they were the producers who were making those records. And they had a very distinct sound to them.
Fantastic. The work's incredible, man.
Thank you very much.
I guess maybe we'll leave it at that.
I think that's fair. Just listen to the show. Like it's like asking David Lynch, what are your movies about? I'm not going to tell you. Just feel it.
My favorite things in the gloom of his death was remembering the amount of times that someone would say, can you expand on that? No.
Eraserhead was my most spiritual film. Okay.
It doesn't need to be contextualized.
No. And I think the beauty of art, or the beauty of storytelling is why waste the time talking about it? Just feel it.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by how things are made, like the mechanics of like how we do this job, how filmmakers, all that. I could listen and watch that stuff endlessly.
Sure.
I don't need you to tell me what it's about.
No, absolutely not.
Thanks so much to Kevin and the rest of the Run Fool team, and thank you for listening to Inside the Tent. If you haven't already, don't forget to go to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com.